Welcome everybody to the webinar. I'm going to go through just a couple of quick things to get started so that we can have a good program here. So first off, disclaimer is that everything that we'll be going over today is giving their own ideas of the panel, not necessarily advice, and all information is presented as of the latest information at this time. And then lastly, we've done a lot of these webinars. This is our 5th webinar, so all of the previous webinars are posted on the surgery.org website. So you can see the website there. Dr. Adams has just put that into the chat function so that you can click on it and bookmark it. So as we move forward and get more information, more questions to your answers regarding the CARES Act, loan applications, virtual consults, etc. All of that will be posted to that website. So that should be a really good bookmarked resource for you going forward. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Robert Singer.
First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone, but I have to personally thank Blaine, and we all do. He's been a tremendous help. This has been a partnership of the Aesthetic Society and Sientra. They've provided the technical support that have made this series very effective, and there are a lot of people who've worked on it, the heads of the Education Commission, Bill Adams and Jamil Ahmad, who've been invaluable. Before I introduce the speakers, I have to realize that we're really a community going through similar problems, and the Aesthetic Society, and we're all there to help. We need to be thankful because most of us are in situations that are a lot better than the 6.6 million people in the US who are unemployed right now and 3 or 4 at home. So we're here to address your concerns. We empathize, we all going through this. We can't cover every topic that's on your mind, but we've covered many of those on the prior ones. And as Blaine said, you can log on to that from the aesthetic website and see all the things that have been covered before. We're also going to have additional webinars in the future of rethinking, along the lines of rethinking your practice, but also as we emerge out of this horrendous situation to restarting your practice and wrapping it up. So I'd like to go on now to introduce you briefly. The speakers and the presenters will be Karen Zupko, who has been a friend and an ally to the many of us and to the Aesthetic Society for many years. She's president of Zupko Associates. Amy Anderson is her associate, and they will present together. Next slide, please. Mark Jewell and I have presented practice management panels and symposium and teaching courses along with his wife and Mike Edwards for many, many years. And Jennifer Wiggins is CEO of Aegis, deals only with malpractice. And she is going to update us on the information with regard to malpractice. And I think many of you have questions about that. What we're going to do is have each of them present, and we're going to hold the Q&As until the end, and we'll go through and try to answer all of your salient questions. Bob Baker, the legal counsel for the Aesthetic Society, Jamil, and Bill Adams will be answering some of your chat questions as we go through. So we hope this is productive and answers many of the issues that we all have. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Karen and Amy.
Okay. Well, let's get started. And the good news is that many plastic surgeons are tapping into the Payroll Protection Act, and they are retaining staff. And the even better news is that those practice teams can now get to work on that long list of to-dos. And we've got an example of that long list. These are the things that we always put on our agenda in January, and then all of a sudden come December, we look and we never quite got to all of them. So my colleague Amy Anderson and I have put together a list of 7 issues that we find to be very, very common problems. And we hope to give you some suggestions for how to move the ball down the field during this pause. Let's look at the next slide. And this is important. Throughout our presentations, we're going to be referencing tools and articles, and all of these resources can be found on Radar, and importantly in the Practice Solutions section of that site. And it's accessible to not only to surgeons, but to your office staff. That's really important. So one of the first things I hope you'll do is to register your practice manager, your patient care coordinator, so that they can access the videos, the articles, the tools that we have available. And Amy, if you look at the next slide.
Yes, so this comes to our first point, is having written policies and procedures for each of the jobs in your office. And the reason why you see an empty binder here is because back in 2007, when I was managing a plastic surgery practice here in Indiana, there were no written procedures on how to do each job. And I recognized that early on. I purchased all these nice little binders with the intention of making a handy desk reference for each staff person. Well, I'm embarrassed to say that 4 years later, when I left the practice, those empty binders were still sitting in my desk drawer because I just never had time to get to it. And Karen and I are in many practices that experience that same time limitation. So use this downtime to have your staff write down step by step how to do all the core functions of their job. The other 2 items that might be worth a look at updating would be your job descriptions and your employee manual. On Practice Solutions, there's a product available for sale from the Society. It's this handy little flash drive full of Word documents so that you can edit and customize job descriptions, employee manual, and those policies and procedures for everything in your office. And this is just a quick example of a recent client who they wrote step-by-step how to do the inventory counts. They included screenshots from Nextech and even photographs of the product, how it needed to be displayed so that the lot numbers and expiration dates could be matched up as well. But speaking of inventory, that brings us to the larger topic of inventory management that Karen will talk about.
In your practice, there are probably 7 different kinds of inventory that you could have. So you've got injectables, you've got skincare products that you sell, you have the backboard, you have implants, you have garments, you have device consumables, and then the office surgery supplies. Very often, the process of inventory management or lack thereof in your practices is an awful lot like sausage making. It's messy. And you need calm, you need a team. We have different people ordering. We have people that don't realize that they should be putting a purchase order in through the practice management system when they order. We don't have protocols for who unpacks, who checks the packing slip against the purchase order to see that we got the right number of things and at the price we planned, that we planned on. Then everything has to be entered into the system. We also need some very definitive protocols for when the inventory counts are done. I have been to 3 plastic surgery practices where the inventory is counted on a paper sheet and never entered into the computer. It's like one of those synapse misses that I struggle to explain. So I urge you to look at the probably $100,000 plus inventory that you have in your office and to get control of that. And to help you, Amy has written a very good article, and it will be in the April issue of ASN. And we've checked with Ben Rubenstein, the editor. The online edition of the magazine will be available in mid-April, and like all of our stories, will appear in Practice Solutions. But I encourage you to have your team read the article and really take this opportunity to get control.
Okay, so on the topic of software, many of you have invested significant money into some of the most elite practice management software out there, yet Karen and I find that by and large, many of the staff don't really know how to use it. And you're barely taking advantage of the higher level features available to you. So use this downtime to have your staff watch the training videos. Managers, I would suggest you watch the video, develop a short quiz of 4 or 5 questions that staff have to answer that would demonstrate that they did indeed watch the training and learn something from it. And we can't talk about software without a reminder to revisit permissions. So doctors, you all should have administrator access to your software.
And some of you don't. Much to your surprise, you will discover 3 other people in the practice have administrator privileges, but not you.
Exactly. So doctors, see that you have this permission and then check to see what staff members are permitted to run highly secure financial reports, for example. The biggest area that I'm concerned about, and I see the most loose controls on, are staff who have the ability to delete payments and delete invoices. I don't think you need a vivid imagination to figure out what can go wrong when staff can enter a payment and then later delete it. There are other functions for voiding and correcting that are the proper workflows. So take a look, see who has those permissions, and lock that down. Karen, would you like to talk about some of the updates to marketing tools?
Absolutely. This is one of my very favorite staff rejoinders when we say, gosh, I thought you told me that the deposits for massive body weight loss patients were due 21 days ahead. Well, they are. Well, I said, but it says 14 on the quote. And she goes, well, we don't do it that way anymore. But we don't do it that way anymore. And then my other favorite is the reports are wrong. It's as though there's a suspicion that I sent some gremlin ahead of time who got in the computer system and screwed up the reports. The fact of the matter is, people often don't check their work, okay? Some of you are blessed with very competent managers and you don't have either one of those things going on. But I want to show you a series of things that I think very important for you to do during this pause, if you will. Number one, everybody's photo gallery can always use a refresh. And these are just pictures. I think this could be made all the more powerful if there were a short description of what the patient hoped to achieve and how you helped them do that. I think another major thing is the pre and post-op instructions. I always remember the time I was reading the breast reduction post-op instruction, and it said the patient would be in the hospital. Well, the patient hasn't been in the hospital post-breast reduction for decades, but nobody reads what it is they're giving the patients. So I urge you to go through and to identify those patients who, when the time is appropriate, you will be contacting to do a review. Who are those happy patients? And most of all, I want you to think about the quotes. And this is my concern. So many of you have invested very good money in producing a polished website. You've invested in SEO. And we then get the patient through the consult, and we give the patient the quote. I argue that the quote is the most important, and it's the last piece of marketing the patient receives. And it's shocking to me that people don't look at the quote and the tone of it. After we've been all nicey, goody, the quote says, and if you don't pay, by this date, your surgery will be canceled. The whole tone changes and things are written in capital letters with exclamation marks. Key words are misspelled. If you're going to do blepharoplasty, I would maintain that you need to be able to spell it. We need to look at what it is we're handing. There's no supportive language that reminds the patient about why Dr. Wonderful should be the surgeon for them. So I urge you to print out all the quotes. And when I say all the quotes, it's because we believe there should be surgical quotes and there should be a template in the system for non-surgical services. This is something Marie Olison and I have been talking about at the Aesthetic Society meetings now for 4 or 5 years. And I continue to see people give a quote that talks about the pre-op date when it's for cool sculpting. So let's be sure that we're presenting ourselves in the most organized and coherent fashion. Amy?
Well, at the annual meeting, we have a 2-hour course on financial management. Obviously, we don't have time to cover all of that today, but I want to make the point that if your P&L is not a powerful management tool, then it needs some updates. So one of the biggest mistakes we see often is when all of the injectable product costs are lumped under medical supplies. When it's all lumped together, it's impossible to compare what you spent on injectable products to the revenue generated. It needs its own revenue line and expense category so that you can make that comparison. The other thing that we've been working with a lot of practices on is setting up their P&L in QuickBooks using the class feature so that you can monitor your service line profitability. So here's an example here of an office that has a med spa and an in-office surgery suite. By putting them in their own class, we can see the overall profitability of each service line. Med spas, for example, can generate a lot of activity, a lot of volume, some good revenue, but is it actually profitable for you? When you set up your P&L correctly, it becomes easy to monitor that at a glance. Our colleague Cheyenne Brinson, who's an MBA CPA, wrote on this topic. You can find step-by-step how to get started on setting up your P&L that way. This is also on Practice Solutions. And then let's talk about accounts receivables. Now, before you say to me, Amy, we're purely aesthetic, we don't have any AR, what are you talking about? I would say to run the report. It is a diagnostic and will show you all of the posting errors that are probably happening in your system. So in your plastic surgery software, there's a very specific way to post the deposits and the prepayments. And when it's done incorrectly, it shows up on the AR report. Moreover, I think you might be surprised to find some patient accounts who actually have a balance and owe you for an esthetician service or maybe a product that the staff allowed them to have without collecting at the time that they received it. For those of you who do take insurance, we want to remind you that there are 2 types of accounts receivable. There's the money owed to you by insurance carriers, and then there's the money owed to you by patients. And this would be the amounts that were applied to their deductible or coinsurance. So we run the AR, splitting it by insurance and patient responsibility. Now, when you look at the insurance AR, by and large, it will be the biggest chunk. But keep in mind, this is inflated. These are your gross charges. So you're not actually going to collect that full amount. It still needs to be processed and adjusted to your negotiated rate. However, the patient AR is what we call real money because the claims have been adjusted. This is the amount the insurance carrier has determined is actually owed to you by those patients. So during this downtime, we think it's an ideal opportunity to be working those insurance AR accounts. For patients that have large balances, I always remind practices, care credit is not just for your cosmetic patients. If they have a large deductible and need a payment plan, care credit can be a very nice solution so that they can pay that off interest-free over a few months. Now, of course, we recognize there's an unemployment issue right now, and we're not suggesting that we send people, the collection agency after these people. But we do think it's pertinent to look at their intake sheet, see what their occupation is, because there really are, a lot of people are still employed and still have a steady income. And so we want to be tactful in approaching those patient accounts. But by and large, it's time to get all of these outstanding AR accounts cleaned up. Karen, what advice do you have for us about the fee schedule?
The following. I want everybody to look at their fee schedule, their pre-COVID-19 charges, and see if those will hold up post-COVID-19 when many of the talking heads on CNBC thinks we'll be in a recession. So I think looking at what you've achieved for an hour in the OR and what profits you may need your non-surgical services to generate if surgery is slow. So you might want to consider multiple procedure discounts if you've never done that. And when I say the word discount, I make this prediction and a big, big bet that all of the non-core marginal players in your neighborhood are going to come out of the gate, and they are going to be all about playing the pricing game. And you need to have a strategy. You need to not make knee-jerk reaction to that. Your staff need to be trained. They need to be a script gone over so it sounds like natural speech to defend your fee schedule and to explain, most importantly, why you're worth it. So I caution you about being prepared for the discounts. Evidence-based pricing strategy is on Practice Solutions. I've had 3 surgeons that said to me it was the best thing I ever wrote, so give it a read, see if it helps. Payer telehealth policies. Again, for those of you who have blended practices, you're doing breast reconstruction, our colleagues have put together a superb chart about what each payer expects in terms of modifiers and place of service codes. This is being updated recently on a daily basis. So that will also be a link for you. And our KZA Telehealth Solutions Center, we're sharing with the society, and you will all have access to it.
Thank you both. Karen and Amy just gave a 4-hour course in about 20 minutes. I appreciate it. I think the real message is use your time productively. You have it, your staff has it. Don't waste that opportunity. And now we're going to move on to Mark Jewell, who has spent a career of looking at and improving business solutions in a practice. Mark?
Thank you, Robert. Great presentation by Karen and Amy. Hey, I want to cover a little bit of the business update, and to kind of get everyone up to speed with regards to the Payroll Protection Act and some other things you need to be thinking about besides the things for the office. Next slide, please. So yesterday, the Paycheck Program application was released by the government. And this is sort of what it looks like. It's an Adobe Acrobat form that you can fill out on your computer, digitally sign it, and send it off to your bank. Now, it's not all that simple because, the bank has to process it, and I'll get into that in just a sec. But either you can do the Payroll Protection Act or the Small Business Administration Disaster Loan, but you cannot double dip. Next slide. So, again, this sounds simple. You fill out the application and then suddenly you've got money in your bank account. It doesn't quite go that way because your banker needs to do diligence on this. And, stuff that's going to be required are things that you're going to have to produce: driver's licenses, payroll expenses, IRS forms 940 and 941, summary payroll report with bank statements, 1099, breakdown of the benefits, and certification that the employees reside within the United States. And then you also need a trailing 12-month profit and loss statement as of the date of the application. documentation of mortgage or rent, lease is important, and also utility bills. So this is how payroll costs are computed. And certainly there's exclusions for anyone that's being paid more than $100,000 a year. So that's capped off at $100,000, which is about what, $8,600 per month for the high paid employees. Now, next slide. Now, the big thing here is remaining liquid through this payroll protection plan loan. And this is a loan, but first, audit your practice, understand your capital needs, your cash inflow, your cash outflow, which is what you spend from historic data. And, it may come down to the realization that you may need more money to stay liquid. And so where can you get that? But, again, if you're going to be taking the payroll protection plan loan, develop a business plan designed around this so that it will be forgiven. And basically, the maximum loan is 2.5 times a 2019 month's payroll. And, if we're all dead in the water, this may be your only cash inflow. So it's up to you how to manage this money that you receive. And certainly, the good news is it will be forgiven. And I'll talk about that in my next slide. But, again, the goal of all this is restarting in a very lean fashion that will enable you to get the cash flowing again. The other option, here is forbearance of rent or office mortgage payments. In talking with our banker, the message is very clear. Don't default on your payments. You can contact the lender or the landlord and say, hey, I may need an extension. Now, if you own your office and you're paying a mortgage on this, what the lender may do is take 90 days of payments and lump it into a balloon payment at the end of the loan term. Now, this is nice. On the other hand, you've got a large amount of money that you're going to have to come up with when the loan term is reached. So, bear that in mind. With regards to leasing, your lessor may extend the lease or possibly increase the rent so you pay this off over time. Next slide, please. Next slide, Blaine. Now, within this payroll protection plan, if you maintain your salaries and employment at the 75th percentile or better, it will be forgiven. And I think this is a 2-month period that you have to do this. So, it's up to you to use your management skills and financial management to keep it together, so to speak. And so it's either calculated with payroll cost or the amount of employees that you retain. So, the goal here is to keep people working and to maintain their salaries. Next slide. Now, all this is supposedly coming tomorrow, but I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal this morning that says a lot of the banks have questions. A lot of the banks have been caught kind of flat-footed on this thing. This application does have to go through a bank approved by the Small Business Administration to loan money. So, the lender's responsibility to evaluate borrowers is unclear. The banks have to submit an application to the SBA in addition to yours. And, this is a loan that's a very low interest rate of 0.5%. So, banks aren't necessarily rushing into this thing simply because, it's difficult for them to sell off a loan with 0.5% interest to a money management group. So, again, there's going to be a scramble. It's going to start tomorrow. You're going to need to get all your information together and submit it. The good news here is it can be submitted, I think, electronically, but you better have your all the statements and things like that your bank wants for you. In our case, we got the documents together, turned them into scanned them and turned them into a presentation for the bank. So it was pretty complete. Next slide. You know, there's still a lot to worry about. I mean, I say this because the new normal will be different than what we had in 2019. You know, the sobering aspect of this is the money that we're going to get may not be soon enough. And, you know, there are a lot of small businesses that are going under or have gone under due to problems with liquidity and insolvency. And, you know, I look at this and, you know, you look at a lot of the indicators, commodity prices, price of wood, price of copper, price of oil, and demand, and it looks like we're sliding into a recession. So it's not going to be, well, we get the Paycheck Protection Act in place and everything's going to be fine. The other advice here is get your personal stuff in order. Look at your wills, look at your advance directives, trusts, assets, things of this nature. I mean, God help if you get coronavirus, but your will and all that other stuff ought to be up to snuff. Make a household budget and stick to it in terms of financial planning. You need discipline both at the office and at home with regards to finances. And finally, you know, this is a tremendous opportunity for us as plastic surgeons to show leadership and resolve to our staff, and, you know, and lead your staff. And, you know, to paraphrase the old Eddie Murphy line out of Bowfinger, keep it together, keep it together, keep it together. And, you know, the other realization here is more capital may be needed than what you're going to get out of the Paycheck Protection Act to keep your practice afloat. So, you know, there are other loans, there are assets you may have to sell, you know, and again, the sobering consequence of this is, you know, we've got a $23 trillion debt. Our gross national product as of 2019 was 19.61 trillion. And so, you know, again, deficits may increase dramatically in the $5 to $7 trillion level. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. A lot you covered in a very short time, both about the office and what to do personally at home. And we'll get to some of those things that I have questions for in a little while. Jennifer Wiggins with Aegis, they only deal with malpractice solutions, not with other aspects of insurance. And she's been kind enough to pinpoint a couple common questions. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Jennifer.
Great, thank you so much. Blaine, if you want to flip to the first slide, I'll try to keep this as concise as possible. There may be some questions that come up and we can address those accordingly. So the last few weeks have been really busy on the malpractice insurance side of the house. Lots of providers asking questions about how they should be changing their coverage, or if they should be changing their coverage, and if they're going to be covered or protected for various things that may be coming up in the years to come. So we already said a caveat at the beginning, but I want to reiterate, obviously, when it comes to insurance, what we'll be sharing here today is just general information. We have gone to all of the top national carriers across the country, and we've gathered kind of the consensus in terms of answers to these questions. But everybody's coverage is unique. Every situation is different. So please make sure that you consult your own agent or your own carrier for specific questions about your policy. That being said, that we'll jump into the first of the 5 questions. If you could flip to the next slide, Blaine. So the question we've been getting a lot is, can I suspend coverage if my practice closes, or should I consider suspending coverage if I'm not doing any surgeries or if I'm not doing anything at this time? The quick answer to that question is yes, technically you can suspend coverage, but there is a very big caveat that I wanted to make sure we noted here today. If you choose to suspend your malpractice coverage or cancel your coverage, just know that that means that you are no longer insured. So if you are still seeing patients in any capacity, you have to maintain some level of malpractice coverage. What we're recommending instead of suspending coverage is actually to ask for a reduction, which I'll talk about next. But keep in mind, again, suspension, while it is available, it's not necessarily recommended. And even though there have been some statements made at the federal level about some protections and leniencies where physicians will be essentially exempt, It is still wise at this point in time to maintain some sense of coverage, just to make sure that you're going to be protected, as all of that is vetted out in the months and years to come. One extra thing I'll mention too here, if you have a claims-made standard insurance policy, which is what a lot of providers have, keep in mind that suspending your coverage or even canceling your coverage could have some tail ramifications, meaning if you cancel your insurance, you may have to buy tail for all of your prior work. So a lot of providers aren't prepared for that expense and don't want that expense. So again, the wiser choice probably at this point in time for most people is to simply drop coverage down and try to get through the next few weeks or months until we're back to normal. Next slide. So this is the big question, can I get a discount if I've stopped doing surgeries or if I've limited the scope of my practice? The answer is yes. Every carrier obviously is different in this regard. Every carrier has slightly different underwriting rules and requirements, but we are seeing a lot of movement on this front. So a lot of carriers are offering to re-rate you. So if you're currently rated as a plastic surgeon, they may be able to drop you down to a non-surgical classification to offer you a little bit of rate relief in this time in which you're not doing surgeries. The other thing they could possibly do would be to add a part-time credit. So if your patient time has drastically been reduced, they can actually apply some different discounts to give you a part-time credit to alleviate some cost on that side. Again, every state is a little bit unique and some states have some restrictions. For example, if you happen to practice in a fund state, Indiana being one of those fund states, those state requirements make that a little bit trickier. So again, talk to your agent or your carrier and find out what options you may have available for you. Before I move to the next slide, one other thing I'll mention, besides what we're seeing in terms of rate reductions and some flexibility with that, we are seeing some really interesting things in terms of other benefits or things that carriers are offering physicians and surgeons during this time. For example, today, MagMutual offered or announced that they are basically waiving all premiums for 9 months. So if you are an insured of MagMutuals or a prospective insured of MagMutuals, they're waiving all premiums for 9 months. A lot of carriers are also deferring payments or waiving payments for 60 to 90 days, depending on the company. So again, check with your agent or your carrier to see what they might be doing in that regard. We're also seeing other things. For example, the doctor's company just announced that retired physicians or surgeons who may want to come back into practice to volunteer, they can actually get free insurance right now. Now, don't get too excited. That doesn't mean you can come back and start doing full-blown plastic surgery from the way you were doing it before. But if you're a retired provider and you want to come back out and help with COVID-19, you can do so. And the doctor's company has said that they'll be offering free coverage for those types of providers. So again, check out your specific company, talk to your agent, and see what options might be available to you. Okay, next slide. Another question we're getting a lot, of course, is telemedicine. So providers want to know, can I virtually see my patients? Can I do consults? And am I covered for that under my current insurance? The answer to that is yes. The majority of all standard insurance policies, this is just part of what they offer. So you probably do not need to do anything to add this to your malpractice coverage. It is probably already there. But again, ask your agent just to confirm. If for some reason you don't currently have coverage for telemedicine on your existing policy, they're making it very easy right now for you to get this added. Most carriers are waiving the applications. A lot of times they're not even charging if there is generally a charge for it, because again, it's usually covered, but if not, you can add it very quickly or very easily. Next slide. We're getting questions about coverage for specific patient claims involving COVID-19. So if a patient contracts coronavirus in your office and they file suit, would you have malpractice coverage for that? The answer to that is probably, and as is typical when it comes to insurance, carriers can't make a broad sweeping statement or any general promises of coverage. But what we are seeing is companies are making statements such as what you can see on the screen. They're saying we would anticipate that that claim would be covered, or we would expect that that claim would be covered. So again, there is no absolute guarantee when it comes to promising malpractice coverage, but what we're seeing in general with the companies we polled is that for the most part, assuming you've met the standard of care and did everything within your control, if there was a COVID-19 related malpractice claim, you would have coverage for that under your existing policy. All right, and last one. Will I have coverage if I work as a volunteer to help out with the COVID-19 crisis? So we have had some providers who have said, hey, I'm not doing surgery, I'm not doing my normal work at this point in time. Can I go help out? And the answer to that is yes. As long as you're doing, normal volunteer work, it's consistent with the training that you've had, you can do that and you would be covered. And as is typical too with most volunteer work, if you're doing volunteer care, you're most likely covered under the Good Samaritan Act anyways. But in case for some reason you wouldn't be covered under Good Samaritan, most malpractice policies will cover for that. And then the last slide I do have is just a bunch of resources. These are the carriers that we've accessed for all of this information. By no means is this every single malpractice carrier in the marketplace, but these are the largest A-rated national carriers that we represent. And these are the ones who we pulled for this information that we presented today. So if your carrier's not listed here, do reach out to them, look them up on their website or contact your agent. Chances are they will have some sort of document or training material regarding malpractice coverage and how that might be affected by COVID-19.
Thank you, Jennifer. A lot of information. We're going to have some quick Q&As, and I want the answers to be very succinct so we can cover as much material as possible. And we'll also get some of the questions that have been submitted by chat that haven't been answered by those who are monitoring that. Karen, you talked about one of the things you mentioned about is having inventory and counting inventory. Karen, if you could unmute.
Okay.
Do you suggest having dual counting of inventory so one person doesn't control that to avoid some problems?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Mark, the forms, from what I understand, talking to heads of two banks, they have the forms that have come from the federal government may be changed by the banks, and they won't necessarily have all of that information until tomorrow. So if you're filled out a form that comes from the federal government, it may be, you need to revise that from your individual bank, and you should get those forms, and those forms may not be available until tomorrow. Is that your understanding?
It is, Robert. I think, again, each bank has different diligence, procedures to determine, the ability of the borrower to pay off the loan. And like I say, it varies from place to place. And it's going to take a lot of documentation, as I mentioned on my slide. So it's great if you calculate this, but the bank will want to double check it, and you need documentation to back all this stuff up.
I think it's important to realize that you may get the loan, get approved for the loan, get the money, but if you don't comply on a timely basis with everything, you're going to forego that for forgiveness of the loan, and you'll be responsible for it.
That's correct.
Okay. Jennifer, talking to the doctor's company and some of the other companies, those who've been with them for a period of time have essentially a savings plan at the end where they have money that's in their name. One of the approaches that from Scott Bartleboard, who's president of the California Society, talking to Rich Anderson, who's president of Doctors Company, was suggesting that some of that money in your individual account be used as the payment for your next quarter. That way it really doesn't cost the company anything, doesn't cost you anything, because most of the companies I've heard won't forgive the next payment. They may delay it 60 to 90 days. Do you have any information about that, of use of that money in that way?
They haven't made any official decision in that regard. There's two companies that offer that type of retirement savings plan. The Doctors Company is probably the most noteworthy. I wouldn't be surprised if that option becomes available, but you're exactly right. As of today, nobody has offered that solution up. But what we are seeing is carriers deferring payments, like I mentioned earlier. So most of them are delaying. So MedPro is delaying until the end of June, for example. MagMutual, like I mentioned earlier, has said they're going to waive all premiums or defer all premiums for 9 months. So that's really what we're seeing more of. But I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, as this continues to carry on and more providers ask, we may start to see those types of solutions available.
From what I understand, individual companies like doctors will make it on a case-by-case evaluation. So suggest calling your insurance agent, speak with them, explain your situation, and they'll see if they can help you in your particular situation. Mark, you had a comment.
Yeah, I mean, if you're insured by the doctor's company, it's called the Tribute Plan, and you can log into their website and find out how much money you have in the Tribute Plan, and it can be a considerable amount of money. So, you know, if that could be tapped, that's another option.
One of the things talking to someone who called me before the website was the concept that they would be taking their PPP. However, they wanted to delay that rather than doing it next week, because then they're really not charged for it until they get the loan, and they may want to defer that because they're looking at more of a problem with cost flow down the road. So that 2 months would apply later on if they took that loan later. Problem with that is we don't know how long that money is going to last, and when they're going to either cut that off, or the reality with the economy today is, you know, perhaps they'll extend that beyond the 2 months. Any comments?
Yeah, I think this is a good start, yet I got a feeling this recovery is going to be slow and prolonged. It's not sort of a V-shaped recovery, you know, with everything bouncing back real quick.
Yeah, if you look at it, it's certainly not going to be a V. It will be more of a U shape, and that U portion of the trough may be a long one. The other thing is we have to realize that when it improves, it's not suddenly going to go back to the practice that you had. And as I think Karen mentioned, many of those patients will be looking for non-surgical options or will not be able to afford surgery. So you have to think in your mind and how to prepare for that. And in future webinars, we'll be addressing that a lot more.
Yeah, Robert, you know, I think one strategy here is, you know, how to fight a price war. And there was an excellent article many years ago by Rao in the Harvard Business Review that talked about this. But, you know, again, there's a lot of different ways you can respond with non-price actions to maintain your fee schedule versus defaulting to discounting.
Karen, I'd like you to comment on that, because let's assume that to survive, you feel you have to discount. Can you ever recover and go back to your fee schedule once you've gone into that spiral of discounting?
I don't think so. I think it's very hard to escape from that. And, you know, you're giving a message to, you know, your patients that what you're charging isn't really worth what it is, and you're willing to cave in on fees. So,
Karen, do you feel differently about that?
I think that there are other ways of hiding the discount. One of them, as an example for breast augmentation, is by using package pricing. Package pricing is a tool, as a well-established financial tool. It has been used by the travel industry, where you would go on American Airlines vacations and you would get a trip for $5,600, and it would include the airfare, the hotel, and something else. So you couldn't tell whether the airfare was discounted, the ground transportation, or the hotel. So that technique offers you some protection, and then you can go back to doing a line item.
So
for those of you that
essentially,
have,
Karen has said, is you have to be creative in how you're going to bundle things to make it appealing to your particular.
or a bundled payment. And also, many people have not, we have survey data that proves this from our patient care coordinator courses. Some people were not reducing second and third procedures at all. So there is room to offer a discount there to reduce the total price. So I think you do have to be creative.
You know, Robert, having office-based surgery does, if it's run well, can give you a cost advantage over a surgery center. And also, as Karen said, do a fee simple pricing versus nickel and diming patients for everything. Robert, you're muted.
Nope.
Bill and Jamil and Bob Aker have been monitoring the chats and answering a lot of them. Do you have any that should be addressed to the whole group? Because not everybody can see all the individual answers to the chat questions. Bill?
I think that Bob maybe can address this, because this has come up quite a bit with several people, not necessarily on this chat, but it's been a question that's been asked like 6 or 7 times today. So Bob, could you come on and just comment on the question about people doing virtual consults across state lines and what your assessment of that is, and if there's any increased liability and what that is and what your recommendation is for our members?
Sure. Well, historically, there's been a lot of states' rights about this. So medical boards don't like it when you're crossing state lines to speak to patients in other locales. However, I just saw that I'm going to go ahead and read it, on March 18th. Vice President Pence, during the press conference, announced that at the president's discretion, the Health and Human Services Department is issuing a regulation today that will allow all doctors and medical professionals to practice across state lines to meet the needs of hospitals that may arise in adjoining areas. Now, I have not looked to see whether HHS has followed up with regulations, because at the time of it, they had not. They may have by now, but I think the important thing is this sort of indicates that there is an attitude, maybe with the medical profession, is catching up with the internet and the realities of medical practice. Just like an FYI, I'm licensed in California, yet I work for ASAPs, and we basically do business with all our members everywhere in the country. And it's specifically permitted that as long as I'm licensed in one state, I can practice anywhere. So at least on behalf of ASAPs. So I think that that's sort of the way that we're going to see this eventually play out. Granted, there might be considerations with, well, are you working with coronavirus patients? Granted, that's the reason why this is coming up, but I think that it'll be larger than that. I think that this coronavirus pandemic has provided precious few silver linings. This may be one of them. The other I noticed is a worldwide drop in pollution levels due to people staying home and not driving their cars. But
we'll go into that in another webinar. Let's stay focused on this, Bob. Are there any other questions of significance that have come up with regard to PPP? Because everything, again, the data that some of the banks have will change as of tomorrow.
Well, to a certain extent, yes. I went ahead and updated the FAQs we have on our website about the Carriers Act and the application process. So the links and everything now are on that FAQs. I'm not sure where it is on the website, but I believe that we went ahead and put it on page 1 so that you didn't have to go through too many layers in order to find it.
It is now on page 1. And even though we're coming to the time where we may have to close this, all of the questions that have been submitted on the chat that haven't been answered or salient, we will make sure that they're updated on the Q&As on the ASAP, on the Aesthetic Society website, and we will make sure that those things are the things that we cover in the subsequent webinars. This is not the final webinar. I think that we'll cover some other things in the future. For example, what happens if you're in contact with somebody who has, that you know is now positive? What do? What's the algorithm you should follow both in your office and at home? And what happens if you have somebody at home positive in isolation? Those are things that we hope to cover in the next webinar because we can't cover all of those things right now. Bill, do you have any other salient questions that came in that we would like our presenters to be able to answer?
No, and I think Bob really did a great job answering them as we went along. So I think that's it.
Good.
Great. Final thoughts, very succinctly. Karen and Amy, anything to add?
My advice is don't waste this time. It's a valuable pause.
Thank you. I think that's the whole message throughout today. Jennifer, unmute. There you go.
Yep, I would just say be your own advocate and ask the questions to see what might be available to help you save some money in this period of time.
And realize, you know, the Aesthetic Society and all of these individuals, we're there as a resource to help you because we're all going through these questions and these dilemmas. Mark?
Well, yeah, I think it's important that the plastic surgeon be visible in the office and not just at home, you know, under house arrest, so to speak. I mean, if you have employees working, be there, set a good example, answer their questions, and brainstorm with them solutions. So, you know, again, this is a great leadership opportunity that we have to take our team into the unknown together.
And as Mary Jewell pointed out in one of our prior webinars, you need to have continued staff meetings, even though if you're, there's Mary, thank you. Continued
Here's
staff
Mary.
meetings, even if you're not all in the office, you can do that through, you know, a link to everybody. And so everybody is updated what your thoughts are, where you're going, employment, answering the questions, because you need to keep that morale of your staff to keep going.
Absolutely.
Mr. Aker, any final comment?
Just that once you get that PPP loan forgiven, and or you or others you know receive those $1,200 checks in the mail, all of that is tax-free. It will not be added to your adjusted gross income. So the feds are saying apply now. They fully expect to run out of money before all PPP loan applications have been processed.
Great. Bill, any final before I ask Blaine?
Nope, we're great. Thank you.
Thank you all. Blaine, we appreciate your
Thank you.
time and effort and making this function very well. And as I said, this isn't the final webinar. We're going to continue to educate, and this may be more of the future of the way we'll be educating if we can't come together for large meetings. Right now, this is your social interaction when you're isolated. So thank you all.
Thanks, guys.